Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Food for Thought. I was studying a little bit more about interoceptive awareness, and I started thinking about those feelings that we feel sometimes when we are maybe a little hungry. We get irritable, we get hangry.
I worked 10 hours! All I want is Wingstop!
So let's go on a walk, another long one, and talk about that a little bit more.
So whenever it's been a while since you ate and you start getting that irritation, that impatience, that is not just in your head. It's happening because your body is actually activating the stress response. And there's a cascade of hormones that are part of that. And in today's video, we're going to delve a little bit deeper into those things and maybe how to interrupt that, prevent it from happening too.
So let's start with the basics. Glucose is the primary source of energy for the brain. And even though the brain only makes up about 2% of the human body weight, it uses about 20% of the glucose that it's in our bloodstream. So glucose is very, very important for our brain. So if we go long enough without eating, our blood sugar can drop below a threshold that is not healthy anymore, which is a process that we call hypoglycemia. And even in mild hypoglycemia, around 70 milligrams per deciliter of glucose in the bloodstream, we can start experiencing those symptoms like confusion, irritation, and that's because the body is starting to sense danger.
Ooh, so this journey is going to be a long one. So getting back on track, when the blood sugar starts dropping, the body perceives it as a threat. The hypothalamus is a part of the brain that is responsible for sensing hunger, thirst, and things like that. And when it senses that the blood sugar is dropping, it activates the HPA axis, which stands for hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. When that cascade is activated, the hypothalamus releases CRH, which stands for corticotropin releasing hormone. That hormone is going to travel to our pituitary gland and make it release ACTH, which stands for adrenocorticotropic hormone. ACTH then is going to communicate with your adrenal glands that sit on top of your kidneys and tell it to release cortisol, which is the primary stress hormone. And cortisol's job is basically to help increase your blood sugar again. And it does it through processes like gluconeogenesis, which uses non-carb sources like proteins to convert to glucose to help stabilize blood sugar levels again. So while all that is happening, our sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight or flight mode, gets activated. And that activation leads to the release of epinephrine, which is also known as adrenaline. Adrenaline causes the heart rate to go up, immobilizes glucose from the liver, and it also causes feelings of anxiety and sometimes panic. So when you're feeling hangry after not eating for a while, that's a combination of cortisol and adrenaline trying to keep your brain fueled. And while this is a biologically adaptive response and normal things happen, it can have its downfalls, especially if it's happening in a chronic way or if it's tied to eating disorders or disordered eating patterns. Had to do a little wardrobe change because the sun's kind of brutal. So research consistently shows that hypoglycemia activates the HPA axis. There's a study from the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism that demonstrated that insulin-induced hypoglycemia led to the increase of ACTH and an increase of cortisol levels within 30 to 60 minutes. Another study found that hypoglycemia leads to amygdala activation. The amygdala is the part of the brain that is associated with threat detection and fear, which can explain why people tend to feel anxious when their blood sugar is low.
CEO of Hangry. I'm starving, Swin! What did you eat today? I ate Nothing! Nothing!
In individuals with a high baseline of anxiety and eating disorders, that stress response related to hunger can become dangerous and maladaptive. When food restriction is chronic, the stress response can become sensitized, and the brain can start associating eating or even thinking about eating with danger, which can create a really vicious cycle. This is something that when you think about it, when you learn about it, it really makes sense. I've been working with eating disorders for a few years now, and this is exactly the cycle that I see in practice. So before we get to the point of our conversation today, let's take a look at our destination. So we are in Colorado, and you guys are not gonna believe, you see mountains over there, and when you look over here, we are at the Great Sand Dunes National Park. It's such a peculiar place because you look here, it looks like you're in the middle of the desert somewhere. And then when you look over there, you see mountains. So what is the clinical relevance of the conversation that we had today? For those with a baseline of anxiety, for those with disordered eating patterns, complicated relationship with food, eating disorders, eating regular and balanced meals is not just important from a nutritional standpoint, it's important from a psychological standpoint, from a mood regulation standpoint. So this is something that I've seen in practice a lot, and it makes a big difference. And I think that we all experience this to some extent at some point in life, being super mean to our partners when we are actually needing a snack or needing to grab a meal, that's all super normal. But when it becomes chronic, when it becomes something very consistent and persistent, it can definitely be problematic. So let's recap. Going hungry will activate your stress response, and that happens both through the HPA axis and the sympathetic nervous system. It culminates with the release of adrenaline and cortisol that help increase the blood sugar levels and protect the brain. But when it happens in a chronic way, or for those with a high baseline of anxiety, with eating disorders, disordered eating habits, it can trap them in a cycle where they don't eat, they get anxious, it makes it harder for them to eat, and it just keeps repeating in a loop. And understanding this is important not only for clinicians, but for anyone who wants to have a better relationship with food and have peace with it. So if you like today's content, make sure to drop a like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.